Welcome to another episode of Mystic-Skeptic Radio. I know we keep things spicy and controversial. We had white nationalist on the previous show. I didn't know that my boy, his name is in Latin. It means the angel of wrath. He's a veteran who he's been on the show several times, and he claims he's a moderate. He sounds like a libertarian, but he was full-blown white supremacist on the last show. He said he wanted to send black people that misbehaved to Liberia, that he wants to deport all immigrants, that he wants Trump and his goons to stay in power because they're doing such a great. Um, the reason that I enjoy talking to him is because he has somewhat of a nuanced approach towards Jews, even though today he told me that the Torah was written by scoundrels. Pretty much the whole Bible was written by scoundrels, but he loves Jesus. And then
But
he said,
does he call himself a Christian national, Christian white Christian nationalist?
I don't even know what he calls himself. He kind of like swerves out of things back and forth. Um, and he has very hippie-like ideas about psychedelics and stuff like that. But the one thing that really has been intriguing, even though is very problematic, is the way he studies Islam. So he has gone through all the hadiths, all the major theological treatises of Islam, but it's because he has so much vitriol against Islam. And the one thing that people can do that with the Talmud, people can do that with the Bible or the New Testament, or the letters of the patriarchs or something like that, is that if you're not a learned person, you can misunderstand everything. And Reza Aslan, I don't know if you're familiar with him, Tom. Um, he's a he was a Christian and then he went back to being a Muslim, and he says that only sophisticated people can interpret the Quran and Islamic teachings. So he comes across as kind of pedantic, and Jews could say that also about problematic passages, say, oh, well, you just don't understand, or if you knew Hebrew, things would be better. And it's like, come on, man, there's some very plain things. So that's why I've been able to entertain having him on the show because uh, even though it's almost like it's a weird thing, but like Goebbels used to study with a rabbi, so he could know how to get to the Jews. So you have a white supremacist studying the Quran to know how people end up hating minority groups. That's pretty much what I've been learning from him. And I've been challenging him on like, well, if you're saying that about Muslims, wouldn't you say that about Christians? Wouldn't you say that about Jews? And I've been trying to do that and it never worked during the show. But today we have Tom Saunders, our religion expert, and we're going to be dealing with a very complicated issue. And years back, my friend John Dominic Crossan and I had a really good conversation about what he called was the obstruction of justice of the Roman Catholic Church regarding the what they call a scandal, which really is pedophilia and molestation and sexual abuse of minors, which now we have going on in the higher echelons of American politics, science, religion, um, media, finance, every single group that you thought was untouched by perversion and sickness and abominations has been tainted by the Epstein files. And I have a couple of weird theories, and I want to throw them by Tom, who has a lot of sociological understanding and, um, almost like anthropological, religious perspective about the world. But we're going to start with what I did and how little support I got for it. So a couple of days ago, I was trying to figure out how could I get the American populace community to to pressure the politicians to do their darn job. And it makes me mad that someone like me, who I'm nobody, would be the one to put a petition out to try to find justice for the victims. And we're going to use the victim instead of the word victim instead of survivor, because you're a victim when you don't get any justice. You're a victim when you're not believed. You're a victim when they gaslight you and they treat you like you're at fault. And that's what Alex Jones has been saying about the victims. So I started this petition on Care 2 um, that says justice for Virginia Giuffre, condemnation of government inaction regarding Epstein related perpetrators of exploitation, trafficking, and human rights violations. So a friend of mine and I, he happens to be ex-Catholic who was Episcopalian for a while, came up with a list of crimes, sins, and unethical behavior that the Epstein perpetrators committed. But I added the George Bush Jr.'s TVPRA, which is a anti-human trafficking like law that he passed in 2006. Is the It focuses on prosecution, protection, and prevention of women and children in humanitarian in a humanitarian way, and seeing human trafficking as a humanitarian crisis that is going on in the U.S. So these guys and females, now to know from the people that have come up on the Epstein list of connections he has, are guilty of human trafficking slash slavery, molestation slash child abuse, coercion slash sexual intercourse against their will, work violations and mistreatment while working under false pretenses for massages and other services, physical violence, harm against a person, torture and bodily harm, kidnapping, rape slash aggravated sexual assault, sexual exploitation and prostitution, immoral slash unethical mistreatment of victims, undignified treatment of a person, abuse of minors slash defenseless victims, violence, threats, and emotional abuse of women and children, violation of human rights, civil rights, and innate sanctity of those humans, medical neglect and lack of assistance for victims, malfeasance of personal dignity, ongoing dismissal of emotional, physical, and spiritual needs of survivors, abominable acts leading to trauma, pain, and neglect, violation of personal identity and bodily autonomy, lack of accountability and acknowledgement of their destructive, harmful behavior, and ongoing disregard for grievances by persons under the U.S. law in violation of their constitutional rights. Do you want to add anything else to that list, Tom?
Well, other than abuse of office, abuse of privilege, abuse of authority, uh, I mean, that's a pretty comprehensive list.
And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a criminal. I'm just someone who has worked with human trafficking victims, someone who has seen the impact of sexual assault and domestic violence on survivors, someone who has met people who have been molested and sexually abused by family members, and someone who can very easily identify an abusive individual because they manipulate, control, gaslight, um, take away their self-worth, create an environment where they don't have access to a support system, dominate and humiliate the person, destroy their um, dignity, and almost like a spiritual crime to hurt someone in such a deep way. And these guys are doing it with impunity.
Yep.
And
Yep.
now we find out that the these creeps um, are almost like too big to fail. It's similar to the 2008 crash where Trump is saying the reason that I don't want to pursue this is because I don't want the stock market to crash. So is our financial system based on slavery? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really it's really sad that throughout history these things have happened, but that's not an excuse to allow these things to happen now. And your petition's a great plan. Um, if we're going to be progressive in the proper sense, these are the things that we really need to uh, bring to light and condemn and expose. It doesn't matter if it happened during, the Romans. It didn't matter if it happened during the medieval era. It doesn't matter if it happens in third world dictatorships. It is totally contrary to our culture and system of laws. So it has to be condemned and called out.
Well, hold on. You don't have to be progressive to find all these things disagreeable. I want to hear from all the religious guys. I want for the Pope, the chief rabbi of Israel, the head imam of Saudi Arabia. I want for all these guys to stand up and say, "What the heck are you guys doing? Why are you
Yep.
saying that it's okay to hurt children? How come we haven't heard from any of those clowns?"
And when I say progressive in the largest sense of it, I mean like the abolition of slavery, like women's rights, like uh, the 40-hour work week. You know, the evolution of society. This should be part of the evolution of society to abolish these things. So when I say progressive, I'm not limiting it to left wing thinkers and left wing politicians or people of that ideology. I'm saying this is human race progression that everybody should be part of. Like you said, the Pope, the chief rabbi of Israel, any religious leaders in any country should call this out and condemn it and call it out by name. I mean, when you have real evidence that this people have participated in this, I don't care who it is, whether it's the president, whether it's um, prime ministers, kings, whatever, they should be called out by name and held to account. And if I've seen other people say, if the economy needs to collapse to call this out, well, then it needs to collapse because this is more important. Not this. I don't think it would collapse. I don't think so. But like some people have said, if this causes our country to, um, our government to collapse, well, then it deserves to collapse. And I don't like the idea of civil war or doom and gloom or um, insurrection or anything like that. That's abhorrent to me. But these things need to be exposed. They need to be brought to light. It doesn't matter who. It doesn't matter what happens.
Do you know much about the Shah of Iran?
A little bit, and I know that he was basically put in place by a coup, kind of like when Jacobo Arbenz was ousted from Guatemala back in the 50s. There was a lot of regime change all over the world, and that was partially what was happening in Vietnam, which led to the Vietnam War. But there's a book, it's an older book called Bitter Fruit, and I can't think of the author's name, but it mainly had to do with the coup against Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in the 1950s, and it sort of was a primer on uh, regime change from the State Department, the CIA, USAID, all those agencies, and it's historically accurate and well worth reading. And the same kind of thing with I'm blanking on the guy that they ousted for Pinochet to take over Chile. Um, that was another. That was in the 70s. That was another regime change action by non-democratic means, let's say.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I was confused between a Shah and Ayatollah. So the Shah is the secular leader, and the Ayatollah is the religious leader, right?
Right. The Shah basically is Farsi or Persian for king. There was a royal line in Iran, and the Shah was. I'm not sure what the role of the Shah was before the government was changed, um, but the Shah was basically elevated as king and ruler of Iran with basically the support of the CIA and the United States government. I have a friend who lived in Iran at that time. He is Iranian, or as he likes to say, he's Persian. And I don't think he would care for me to share that he was hired by Voice of America in Tehran in those days to make propaganda messages in Farsi. He was so good at it that they brought him over to the United States, and he wound up going to school here, getting a good education, joining the U.S. Army, spent 25 years in the U.S. Army, and then worked for the VA, and then had a pretty lucrative career afterwards. Um, but he's not the kind of guy. He still goes back. He's quite elderly, and he still goes back and forth to Iran, so he's not worried about the current regime, given his past. So I don't know what to say about that. But no, the Shah was basically installed as a ruler with Western intelligence agencies propping him up.
Well, let's say that Trump became the Shah of the US, and we all were cool with it. We think he's the greatest and he should be king. And then he installs the greatest pastor, I don't know, T.D. Jakes or Joel Osteen as the Ayatollah of the Christians. And, let's say that this Ayatollah of the Christians says that women shouldn't wear bikinis and, little kids are not allowed to party or whatever. And he makes it so strict that you feel like you're under a religious dictatorship. And the king is cool with that because it serves his purposes. One of the young ladies decides to go sunbathing and somebody catches her and kills her. Wouldn't the Ayatollah be enraged that even though he believes in complete purity and modesty, the killing of the girl is worse than the girl wearing a bikini? Wouldn't that make more sense in the religious mentality that, okay, we took it too far. We don't want people to be immodest, but them being dead is even worse. Wouldn't that make more sense instead of like an Ayatollah who would be like, oh, a woman got murdered because her hijab fell or she took it off or whatever. Oh, well, that's what happens when you don't follow the rules.
That makes sense from a faith perspective because most world faiths involve a certain amount of forgiveness and grace. Um, even in some more moderate Muslim countries, there's forgiveness and grace. Certainly in Israel and of course in Christianity. But the point being is that they would install a person like that. The idea is not to foment religion. The idea is to lock power. And when you mix government and faith, faith always is subservient to the government, and it's always a tool of those in power. And I think some of the folks who are pushing for Christian nationalism right now are more intrigued by the power aspect than they are the faith aspect. Now, some people like Doug Wilson may have a personal faith, and he's not a stupid guy, but my understanding and my observations all around, even within denominational politics, once people get to a certain level, it's about power and authority and money and the things that come with it. So yeah, logically, on a religious sense, you're right. But I don't think when someone uses religion as a tool of the state, I think it ceases to be a true religion.
So how come religious folks are not as outraged about the exploitation of children? There's pictures coming out where Epstein is hanging out with like babies and small children and taking lewd pictures of them. So now it's undeniable. And then you can say that Noam Chomsky didn't know and he was just talking about politics and finance or whatever. And you can say that Michael Jackson and uh, whoever else is in there, they were just visiting because they wanted to expose the craziness that was going on, or they just are party animals or whatever. Same with Oprah and Ellen and all these people. But the ones who were funding him, the ones who were definitely in the email saying, "Hey, go pick me up some girls," or Derek Chopra saying, "I'll get you some Israeli girls," or whatever. The ones where it's like blatant. Um, how come we are not all gathering around saying this is disgusting, this is horrible, I can't believe that we allowed it to go for so long. He slipped through the cracks because his connections, and he's gone, but now we're going to come after everybody that emboldened him and enabled him. How come everybody's being so passive? And my petition only has 12 signatures, and I put it on every single group that I could find. um, and there's other similar petitions. They're kind of wild, like, impeach Pam Bondi, hold them accountable. They're all kind of, almost like yellow journalism, like trying to get people excited about something, but there's very little interest in the victims. So what is really coming down to, and this is a conversation we had a couple of weeks back, is that the reason that femicide is so high in Mexico is because there's a culture of disregard for women. So is that where we're at over here? Like we pretend that women are equal. We pretend that we want to protect children. We pretend that we are a religious like country, but in reality, it's the last thing that is concerning people. What is really concerning them is gas prices, their financial well-being. All the other things that people pretend to be interested in are just fluff. They're just nice things you say in public when they're worried about drag queens in libraries. You should be worried about the real perpetrators and rapists that have so much power that they there's people have said weird things like that the girls were like shrimp on a plate, or like peanuts in a bar, that it was just one of the many pastimes while they're destroying the world and cutting deals. Uh, Alex Jones went as far as saying that they couldn't make the deal unless they participated. So what else are they can do? And then also the idea that the girls became perpetrators themselves, so they were madams of Epstein. So that's why you can't really pursue anything because they were complicit at a certain point.
Uh, just to let you know, I have been trying to sign the petition, but for some reason it doesn't like my email address. So I'll keep working on it. But um, you know, whether one accepts the power differential argument with sexual abuse or not, um, whether someone says, well, some of these people were adults and they made these decisions. It's even with some consent, there's still things you shouldn't do to other people, whether they consent or not. Now, the issue of people not getting upset about it when it comes from a religious perspective is um, power is an idol, and some of these politicians have become almost like idols to bow down to. I was having lunch with a progressive Christian several months ago, and we were talking about politics, and he was angry with me because we were talking about. I had said basically that Donald Trump was not a. He agreed with this. That Donald Trump not a Christian, doesn't act like a Christian, and doesn't care about Christians except for power. And he agreed with me on that. And I said, and I don't see that some of our other politicians across the aisle were any better. And that really upset him. And I said, well, it's pretty much established fact that John F. Kennedy and uh, Lyndon Johnson, for example, uh, basically molested, raped some of their staff, some of their women. And he was pretty furious about that. And he said, well, men of power have large appetites. And I basically said, well, that's what the MAGA people are saying about Trump. Uh, we can't excuse this in anybody. It can't be excused. And from the religious side of things, uh, it's because their team is more important than ethics or morals. It's like the Super Bowl. Politics has become like the Super Bowl every 4 years, especially, and it's more my team versus your team. And people don't really think a whole lot about the moral and ethical implications. I was talking to a healthcare professional the other day, and this is a different topic, but basically getting ready to retire and saying that this person felt like they had sustained moral injury because they couldn't serve the people that came in like they thought they wanted to. And you and I both work in healthcare. We know that happens. Um, there's a lot of things that people just don't care about that are of great moral and ethical import. And what you're talking about tonight is at the top of the list. I think um, his own son has discredited him some because of Christian nationalism. But Christian writer Francis Schaeffer, used to say that, and he was talking from a conservative Christian point of view, that people in the pews, let's say, all they want is a comfortable life with no challenges, ethically, morally, physically, and they're willing to do what they have to do to avoid standing up in these situations. And you and I work with some good people, and just about everybody I know is outraged at work anyway, is outraged about this whole thing. In the Christian community, I don't hear much talk about it. I guess because we haven't kept our own house very clean when it comes down to these things.
So, have you felt the weight of the immorality of this? Like, I believe that it's destroying our morale because if the people in charge are not following the rules, what makes us want to follow the rules? Us little people who have very little influence, very little power, and it seems like it's all a scam to control the masses.
I recently came to understand this term black pilled, and my understanding of it is, you have the matrix, the red pill, the blue pill, and now they talk about the black pill where people just have given up. You know, there's no hope. There's no people who were hardcore Trump followers see him as uh, compromised, not just morally, but politically as well, that he's not followed through on what was voted for. And I see people on the left as well with some of their heroes showing up in these Epstein files. And people want to throw up their hands and say, well, I give up. I'm not going to participate anymore. For me, from a faith perspective, and I know for you, our own personal righteousness is governed by our faith. And so we still do what we need to do because of that.
Okay, so here are the wild theories, and I want to see what you think.
Sure.
So I've been listening to Nick Fuentes, and he says, let
Sorry,
the,
you have to do better you than me.
he says, let the Republicans burn themselves to the ground so we can rise above them because they don't follow with their promises. They stop deporting people. They're they're wishy-washy. They don't want to take out Iran. They don't want to show our strength. They didn't even finish the job in Venezuela. So he's coming hard against Trump and he's ramping up the anti-Muslim, anti-black, anti-immigrant, anti-Jewish rhetoric. I realized he was a Fed when I was hearing him because there's one thing that, as you were saying, the CIA manipulating um, the the different countries is the idea that the U.S. can thrive in chaos. Um, because what other alternative do you have? If you have a united, uh, populace, then you don't have any reason to counter it. Like, I have a theory about January 6th that they wanted to take out all the extremists and Trump, so they put them all in one place, and then they can prosecute them. Uh, the same with Antifa and Black Lives Matter. They want to demonize any extreme to keep the status quo. So if you rise Marion Gaines and Nick Fuentes against the Jews, it correlates with the two CIA operatives that have been on Joe Rogan that say that they hated Israelis because Israeli operatives were very forceful and they always wanted to get their way. And the more anti-Israel and anti-Semitism that you can muster, the more the U.S. can control and manipulate Israel instead of the other. So if you really think about being a dog eat dog world where everybody's trying to get, um, you know, a leg up somebody else, that would be the way to do it, to get everybody angry and get everybody to scapegoat another group, and you can still be doing all your scams and schemes on their noses. Um, it's just very, they say that we don't know how Epstein became so rich and so influential. So they said it was the CIA and the Mossad that propped him. I think a lot of these personalities have that uh, almost like you were saying, like the guy in Iran making propaganda. Like, why did they let Henry Ford get so far with his anti-Semitism? Because it was good for business, and and they were selling goods to the Nazis. And the Nazis were learning stuff from us, like Jim Crow and eugenics and stuff like that. So if it's good for business to get people angry at each other, if it's good for business to build up the hatred and the resentment, why not do it? Um, you can keep manipulating, you can keep on um, hurting people and doing all this stuff. And then the second theory is that there's no way Epstein was working for any um, the intelligence agency directly because he was too sloppy and too stupid. Do you really think that all those emails where they say that they want to eat babies and they want to be with little girls and all that stuff would be done on a um, public server if they were doing honeypot things for the Mossad? The Mossad is not known for being that silly unless they were doing it on purpose. Like if the Mossad is like Mission Impossible, every message you know blows up after you receive it. Why would he put it on a server? Why would he have it available for his private state to give it to the government if if he's in with the government? So it almost feels like an Alex Jones conspiracy that was created to badmouth someone. It's too ridiculous. Like, if they were really manipulating people, you wouldn't even know you're being manipulated. You would have never known about these girls. They would have disappeared them all. Why is there victims? There wouldn't be any victims left. They would have gotten rid of the evidence. So it almost seems like my theory is that they came to him after he had all the blackmail stuff, and they said, "Hey, how can we manipulate Prince Andrew?" Um, he was just doing it on his own, and people are that wicked and that stupid that the intelligence agencies took advantage of it and started using him as leverage towards all those people. What do you think about my two theories?
Well, the second theory, and current religion, especially Christianity, American Christianity, is what I really follow. And there's been some people come out about some of these mega church pastors and people who call themselves apostles and prophets. And the story is that they keep a dossier on each other so that if somebody gets out of line, they can expose them and flush them if they're no longer useful for their enterprise. I'm not even going to call them churches. I'm going to call them enterprises. And, maybe perhaps that was Epstein's plan with these people. Not initially part of the, like you said, any government or any government agency. But like you said, if he's profiting by holding blackmail material over some of the richest and most powerful people in the world, and let's say he did that on his own, well, as soon as one of these agencies finds out about it, they're going to want a piece of that. So I find the second theory to be a little more um, viable. Although the first theory, if he was working for some government or government agency, they could have said, yeah, make it look sloppy because uh, if there's a whiff that the Mossad or the CIA is involved, these people won't fall for it. And he was able to get all kinds of dirt on these people, like Noam Chomsky and who's the guy, the Secretary of Commerce, I'm blanking on his name, who swore he had nothing to do with them, and now it looks like he was right in the middle of it all.
Nick,
And yeah, I'm blanking on his name. It could go either way, but given that it didn't initially seem to have the profile of a sophisticated profile of the CIA or the Mossad or MI6 or one of those groups, um, maybe he did it on his own and they found out about it and said, "Oh well, we can use this." I don't know. I don't know.
but what about the hate mongering from uh, those characters? On the right and on the left, you have these people who are unhinged and they talk a lot of trash, and people like Trump because he speaks his mind. So now you have people who are out trolling Trump on both sides. St. Uger was saying that now he believes in 9/11 conspiracies. Uh, he seems to be a grifter and he's just trying to get more clicks. But there are people who are really good, like a Candace Owens, at spewing hatred, almost too good at it. Uh, it's almost like what I was telling you last time about Charlie Kirk, where it's almost like they're being coached on how to uh, get people's emotions to rise. Um, it it seems a little manufactured. That Jewish reporter from England, I mean from Canada. Um, she wrote "Manufactured Consent" that
Mm-hmm.
that the Bush administration created a narrative of weapons of mass destruction, of fear of terrorism, to create enough consent to go to war. Now they're saying that it was all Bibi Netanyahu trying to take over all the Middle East. Um, but back then they were saying that it was Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld who were the ones coming up with these things. And what they don't understand is that Bibi can want to take over the whole world, but that doesn't mean he can, and that doesn't mean that he's gonna dupe the U.S. to support him, because the U.S. is never gonna do anything for free, and they're never gonna do anything for less than one reason. Um, or they're always gonna do it for more than one reason. So maybe they did want to make sure that Israel didn't get rocketed by Iraq, but they also wanted to take over the petrodollar. They also wanted to show strength, so people didn't mess with them. They also wanted to do a regime change so they can cut more deals and do pipelines and stuff like that. So they're not just going to do it for one reason. And the same thing is coming up about Venezuela. I would like now for the last 20 minutes of our show to uh, gear more on your experience of what was that with Venezuela? Like, it was so ridiculous the way they went about it, and the job was not finished. Do you see some type of also like manipulation in relation to that, where they're just playing games and trying to topple Cuba and trying to do things just to make their base happy? Is that what they're doing?
Well, there's a couple things with that and with the whole domestic and foreign policy. There's sort of this herd anxiety. Instead of manufactured consent, we have, and I was writing some notes on this morning. We have this herd anxiety in the United States, and it affects people of goodwill because we see these groups fighting with each other over foreign policy, over domestic policy, and those of us who are trying to live good and honorable lives are anxious because we don't fit anywhere anymore. Um, the my thoughts on Latin America right now, especially the Caribbean, is that Secretary Rubio is of Cuban descent, grew up in South Florida with this mentality of we have to we have to take our homeland back, and perhaps along with all the oil wealth and everything in Venezuela, perhaps that's just the first stepping stone because right now Cuba has been cut off. Their fuel supplies have been cut off. So basically, there's an embargo, and we're starving Cuba um, with from starving them of their energy resources because most of this came from Venezuela. Uh, so that was a strategic move. I don't think they cared about finishing the job in Venezuela. I think they cared about getting Nicolas Maduro out of there, and his successor is now can put up a good front, but she's basically at gunpoint and has to do what the State Department and the CIA say. But I think it was a strategic move more to cut off the fuel from Cuba, starve them out, and then retake Cuba. That's my opinion. And not that a lot of Republicans are very high on conservative Cubans in Florida, but as you know, a lot of the exiles from Cuba wound up working for the military and the CIA, and a lot of links in there. That's my theory anyway, and it has to do with Marco Rubio's heritage and desire to retake Cuba. There was a Cuban psychologist or psychiatrist, I'm sorry, at the Pima County Jail when I would interview prisoners out there. And you'd run into a hallway and say, "Hey, doctor, how you doing?" And he'd say, "Is Fidel still alive?" I'd say, "Yeah, he's still alive." This was 25, 30 years ago. And he'd say, "Hey, I'm not doing well then." You know, uh, like some folks say next year in Jerusalem. A lot of the Cubans say next year in Havana.
So let's say that a large religious organization had a secret vault of videos of kids being abused, and um, bunch of people that we looked up to were involved in that. How do you think the secular world would respond if it was the other way around, that it was only religious people doing it and the secular world was actually righteous and moral? Um, wouldn't they say that the religion is a hoax and everything they preach is a lie? Would that be the response?
Absolutely, and I think people of goodwill within the faith would say the same thing. If I found out that people in my heart hierarchy were involved in these things, I wouldn't hesitate personally. Um, I don't have much to lose in that regard. I mean, all they can take away from me are my ministerial credentials, and that's not a big deal. I can find someone else to endorse me as a hospice chaplain, so I wouldn't have anything to lose. But there are secular people I know personally, totally non-religious people whose ethics and morals are surpass many religious people. uh, it would be the right thing to say that this can't happen. We've got to stop these people, no
I
matter
think
what.
I think when you talk about the devil, um, this is going to be an exercise of morality. So let's say that the devil wants to destroy, um, you know, God's kingdom on earth or whatever. Um, he would first desensitize people, um, and then expose all the darkness, because we already had a huge, religious entity with a bunch of perversion and stuff that was hidden and obstructed by multiple popes for the last 20, 30 years. And all people could say was there's bad apples. And they say the same thing about police brutality, they say the same thing about ICE, they say the same thing about politicians. So no one ever thinks we need to tumble the Catholic Church and start all over. They say, oh well, they're people, and and so I would think that if I was Satan, I would say, look, um, the way that I keep abuse institutionalized is to confuse people and to say, almost like what Jesus said, the the weed and the chaff, like you have, um, the bad fruits and the good fruits, they're all growing together, and you can't catch them. It's like Pokemon, you can't catch them all. So now you have Derek Chopra and the Dalai Lama. You have Ellen and Oprah. You have, um, Lex West and whoever else, and you have all these people, and they're all in different fields, and some are politicians, some of them are entertainers, whatever. But it's not all entertainers. It's not all politicians. So then you can say, oh well, all rich people. Like so then it's really easy to get confused and to say, well, human trafficking, like you were saying, is a centuries, millennia old thing. Humans have trafficked each other since the pharaohs. So it's not that our government is bad. It's not that rich people are evil. Is that some rich people use their power for evil and some of them use them for good. And the greatest example is Bill Gates. I told my wife about Bill Gates, and she's like, "That's weird. He's such a nice guy. He does a lot of research and a lot of good stuff for people." And I'm like, "Honey, like, yeah and no." And then they also do philanthropic things while they're abusing people. Um, so is it would be easy to keep evil going if you confuse people. And I think that's what happened with the Nazis. So I hate when people start calling people Nazis and they start devaluing the term. But I really think that this is the precursor of the new Nazis, where the rich and the powerful can get away with anything because they have access to everything. So the Nazis had access to everything, and everybody was confused because they're trying to make the Germany great again. They're trying to unify our politics and focus our energies, but they're killing Jews and gypsies and gays and blacks. But look at the nice roads, look at the big buildings, look at our um, what do they call it, infant, we're having a lot of babies, um,
Infant, low infant mortality rate or
or
higher
high
breeding.
fertility or whatever.
Yeah.
So look, we're not going to disappear. We're going to be great again. So is that what's happening with the technocrats? And because he was into crypto, he was into robotics, he's into all kinds of weird scientific stuff. So they're building this, you know, almost like the for Skynet and AI to take over with all these wicked people in charge.
Well, I've talked to some of my family members about being a little bit careful about throwing around the term Nazi and fascist. Um, Not because, uh, I mean, we have freedom of speech. You can say what you want. Um, However, I think some people on the left are correct about desensitization. And desensitization, like you said, is a precursor to totalitarianism. And I think we are way beyond desensitized, but we're still in our different tribes. We're desensitized about different things. Um, Now people are confused because right-leaning people want to point the finger at people like Bill Gates, um, people like Prince Andrew, but now with so many people on the other side of the aisle coming up in these files, they can't. I mean, they I mean, it's sort of like checkmate. And I think a lot of these people who are named in these files and guilty of these things have hoped to hunker down and ride the storm out, but doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And there are people in the government who who have pushed very hard to expose these things. Now, are they doing it for reasons of justice? Or are they doing it to advance their careers? Well, it can be argued either way. But I think we're in a very odd time right now, in that people on the right can't argue with people on the left over who's guilty of these things, because both sides have heroes that have been named. And there are a few, like I said, maybe maverick politicians who are calling for total exposure and let the cards fall where they will. I don't know. But the desensitization and the milder dehumanization that has started to happen in our culture is to me very worrisome and perhaps frightening, because those are the things that lead to real disasters.
Where are the protests? I know that people were diminishing the power of protest. They were trying to say that everybody were paid, rebel rousers. They were demonizing as terrorists anybody who stood against the siege of Gaza. They were um, maligning Black Lives Matter activists. They were dismissing a lot of stuff. But where are the protests for women and children's rights? How come no one's taking the charge of that? Like, I almost feel like you and I can go and be the next Martin Luther King for that, because where's Code Pink? Where's AOC and all those guys? Like, I thought they were big feminists and allies of the children of America. How come they're all taking it easy on this subject?
And collective action does make for change. It always has, whether it's street demonstrations or whether it's online petitions. Or collective action is the way things get changed. I do think I was discussing this with my son about the Minnesota protests. In my mind, the Minnesota protests were a bit of a psyop to distract people. Um, the state government would not cooperate with the federal government. And as soon as they got cooperation from the state government, that demonstration of force evaporated. Uh, Something like 20% of the arrests have taken place in the state of Texas, another 20% in Florida, because the state government cooperates with the federal government. And I think it was a distraction. Those are the people that were on the streets in Minnesota should be first and foremost protesting the people in power who were in the Epstein files. We're very manipulated as a culture, and I don't want to criticize anybody who is of goodwill and wants to make change, but we're very manipulated. And I think to a great degree, the folks in Minnesota were manipulated. Terrible that two people lost their lives in that, and hopefully justice will be served. But I think it was a psyop and a manipulation. That's my opinion, allegedly. Opinion.
In the last couple of minutes, one commentator, a comedian, Jimmy Dore, says that we're the most propagandized people in the history of humanity. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, and I've been watching Jimmy Dore quite a bit recently. Um, you know, I forgive me for using your home country as a reference, but when I moved to Mexico, I could see the corruption very clearly in the police and the government. To me, it was a very overt corruption. Uh, Mexicans who came here, just we had an exchange program with the University of Arizona. I had some very fine people from Mexican universities come up to pursue doctoral studies in the department where I worked in. Uh, they were wonderful people. They had a better perception of the corruption in the United States than I did because they were coming at it from fresh eyes. Um, Jimmy Dore's right. We're the propaganda and the manipulation of the American people is far more sophisticated than in other countries. And we become so acclimated to it in our own country that we just don't think about it. If somebody gives a cop, a traffic cop in Mexico City, $5 to get out of a ticket, well, that's the price of doing business. And Americans just get really, really outraged about it. Well, we, we give billions of dollars to industries and other power brokers. I mean, $5 is nothing. And collective bribery of traffic cops in third world countries is nothing compared to the billions of dollars of rip-offs and bribes that are passed around in this country. We just don't see it. It's all well, it's not even underground. It's just not perceived. So I think Jimmy Dore's got a point. Not just the propaganda, but the manipulation and the willful or unconscious bias towards our system of government, where people just don't see the corruption because we're so used to it. And some of this recently is blowing that open a bit. There's a crack in that vessel, and people are getting a look inside to see, wow, this is really corrupt. So I kind of agree with what he says.
Tom, would you like to continue the conversation some other day and go deeper into what can we do as people of faith, as people who care for the Constitution, to make things better?
I would, and I should be over in Houston mid-March for a week or so. I really hope we can get some time. Uh, One thing I want to discuss with you is growing up in the evangelical subculture and some of the sociological and social attitudes and ideas that came from that, and what I believe have been manipulated among my generation of evangelicals to lead to sort of this new uh, power hungry evangelical culture that has supported Donald Trump and other politicians. If someday when we're face to face, I'd really like to tell you about growing up in that culture and how I think some of that has affected some people now to be part of this political movement.
Well, I was just talking to that family that I was counseling, and I said, they kept on calling their son that he had a victim mentality because he was sick and now he's addicted to drugs and he blames everybody for his problems. And I said, have you ever thought about it from like Jesus' perspective? And they're like, what do you mean? When Jesus was dealing with the prostitute, I know she wasn't a prostitute, but that's what people call her. He didn't say, okay, whore, see you later. He said, um, why is she acting out? Like, what is the thing that she's missing? Was she abused? Was she like, have you seen that show, The Chosen?
No, I've not. I've had friends that have favorably reacted to it, but I haven't.
So
No.
the first episode is fantastic, and then it goes downhill after that. And it is about that. Mary Magdalene, the demons that Mary Magdalene dealt with were from sexual assault. And then she became a prostitute. So I was telling them, there's so many things we don't know about a person who is doing something that we might not like. we have to take the time to understand what happened to them to get them to where they're at. And just like my wife tells me, there'll be such mental judgmental of people who are sexually promiscuous because they're looking for love like anybody else is looking for love. And it's like, yeah, so there's legitimate needs that are being met illegitimately. Someone who blames others for his problems is because they don't feel safe, they don't feel heard, they want to diffuse the responsibility, they have a hard time um, seeing the consequences of their actions. And the family was like flabbergasted, like they'd never heard that. And I said,
That's been
they say they're conservatives, and I'm like, I'm always going to push back against bootstrap mentality. If
yeah
you just
yeah
say, well, I got my act together and you need to do it too, that doesn't work.
that's been one of the gifts of the work that I've been permitted to do, both in chaplaincy and in street ministry, and when I worked in research at the University of Arizona, interviewing prisoners and homeless people and drug addicts. Um, so many times there was a backstory, and I'm thankful for the way at the university, the way the research was written, so that people had that opportunity to tell their backstory. It wasn't like, well, what are you doing today? Well, why can't you do this? Why don't you go get treatment? Why don't you do that? It was, let's find out their history. So a lot of the interview questions were social history, and people had the option of not answering. But so many times there was a traumatic, very traumatic event or events in their childhood or in their past that sort of was why they wound up where they were. And that's why we can't cast the first stone. Um, I had a patient that was just so sad. It was a hospice patient who had been, she was borderline developmentally disabled. I don't think she would have been considered with a diagnosis in that way, but she was close. And she had been horribly, horribly abused by her minister husband, um, who finally ran off with somebody else. And she was dying and telling me the story about his horrible abuse and how her childhood was horrible and how that's probably why she linked up with this guy. And as a predator, he could read her needs. And it's sad, but it was a real gift that she gave me to tell me that story and understand. Yeah, we try to approach, how we walk in, try to be totally open and non-judgmental. And I walked away from that patient experience thinking, wow, there's a reason for everything. And she was kind enough to meet with me 3 or 4 times before she died and tell me these stories.
So before we talk in person about how Christian perspectives have gotten involved with politics, I want you to consider what some guy told me. So we were talking about Israel, and he was saying people have a hard time believing that the victim can become a victimizer. And so right now I was thinking about how since people were fleeing religious persecution in Europe and they came here and they had to fight their way with the natives to survive, now everything is a battle. Everything is, you know, upmanship over someone else. So instead of Christians saying, we're afraid that we're going to be persecuted, which is sounds like a pile of crap. It's like we're afraid that we're going to be diminished and that we're going to lose our ability to practice our religion freely. So we're going to become authoritative and dictatorial to preserve our freedom. Like that's ridiculous. And that's what they're doing in Israel. They're saying, we're afraid that we're not going to survive, so we're going to kill everybody so we survive. And it's like you're doing the thing that you don't want people to do to you. And then it's like, well, we got to do it to them before they do it to us. So this hatred towards, like, I'm like, can't wrap my head. Why do they hate Mexicans so much? Because they remind them of the Native Americans. They look like them, they have different customs, they're more numerous, and it's like it's this anxiety that, they have like um, generational trauma from causing trauma. And it's the knee-jerk reaction, like we need to take them out. because we can't handle these people that never wanted us to be here to begin with. So it's very strange.
Let me throw one thing at you before we go. Uh, Frank Schaeffer, who used to be a prominent evangelical, and I believe he attends an Orthodox church, but I don't think he really has much faith. His father was Francis Schaeffer, a Christian writer and intellectual, and he had something I want you to think about that I really thought was interesting. He said Christian nationalism is white nationalism. He said if they were really Christian nationals, they would be importing all the good Christians from Africa, China, and Latin America so that we could have a Christian nation. And it made me laugh, but it really illustrated the point very well.
Mhm. Well, again, Christianity is supposed to be universal. So
It is,
when you
yeah.
make it white Christianity, then you're saying it's contradictory.
Yeah,
It's
we
like
only
you,
want the European version. But the centers of Christianity are all in the Southern Cone, Africa, South America, and Latin America. And he's right. He said, if you really want a Christian nation, open the floodgates to all the Christians in all these countries that are better Christians than most Americans. I thought that was pretty good.
I just don't know how Jesus stopped being Middle Eastern. That's so stupid. We hate Middle
I think
Easterns.
the Italians might have had something to do with that. I don't know.
Unbelievable. Okay, brother. Well, always a pleasure talking to you. I can't wait to see you in person.
Likewise, I plan is to be there mid-March for about a week. So hopefully we can get together.
Wonderful. Take care, brother.
Bless you. Bye-bye.